A poor single dad. Sheltered a lost billionaire woman. I never thought that road would change my life. But here I am, sitting on a porch that sags on the West End, watching the sunset over a valley I never expected to call home, and I realized that everything started with that road. That gravel road that stretches out in front of the property like something alive, punishing anything foolish enough to drive on it. Two deep ruts cut through the dried mud and clumps of fescue, narrowing between a rusted fence post on the left and a ditch full of brown water on the right. Most people who end up here end up by accident. They don't drive this way on purpose. This is the kind of road you only take if you have a reason to be at the end of it. A very good reason. And I learned a long time ago that most people don't have a reason to be at the end of my road. Most people see that gravel and they do the math in their head and they decide it's not worth the risk. Not worth the damage to their car, not worth the time it takes to navigate something so deliberately unwelcoming. I didn't blame them for turning back. That morning in late October, I heard the Mercedes before I saw it. The sound came from my workshop about a quarter mile away. It was this grinding, whining noise that made me stop what I was doing and listen carefully. I recognized it immediately. That was the unmistakable sound of a luxury car meeting a gravel road it was absolutely not designed for. That was the sound of silk and steel and German engineering meeting mud and stone and neglect, and whoever was driving that car was about to learn a very hard lesson about the difference between the city and the country. I set down the hydraulic line I was working on and walked out to the front of the property. I could see the dust settling about 200 yards out. The Mercedes was still moving, barely. It crept forward another few yards like it was dying and then stopped. The engine cut off completely. For a long moment, nothing happened. The car just sat there in the dust, wounded and confused. I could imagine the driver sitting inside, hands on the steering wheel, trying to decide what to do. Then the door opened and a woman stepped out. I couldn't see her clearly from this distance, but I could see enough. She stood there in the dust cloud, looking back at the car like it had betrayed her, then ahead at the remaining stretch of road to my house. Her posture told me everything I needed to know. She was calculating. She was running numbers in her head. She was deciding whether to continue on to wherever she was going or turn back to the main road. And I could see the exact moment she decided that the car wasn't worth the risk. She got back in the car. I watched her turn it around carefully, the Mercedes fishtailing back and forth as she tried to manage the ruts without damaging it further. After a few minutes, she pointed it toward the main road and disappeared behind the ridge. The dust settled. The road was quiet again, and I went back to work. But I didn't know it then. That moment would matter. Not because of the Mercedes, but because I would think about it again later, on a night when the rain came down so hard that everything seemed like it might wash away. I would remember that woman making a choice to leave, and I would understand that she had been running from something all along. That whatever was chasing her was worse than any dirt road could ever be. And that choice, that moment where she decided to turn back, would haunt her more than she knew. My name is James Hartwell. I'm 36 years old, though most days I feel older than that. The kind of older that comes from living a life you didn't plan for, making decisions you never thought you'd have to make, and learning to love something so much that the thought of losing it makes you understand what death means. I live on 11 acres of land in Holt County, Pennsylvania. The kind of property that most sane people would sell at a loss. The house is 2 stories of faded white clapboard with a porch that sags on the west end and a kitchen window that has to be propped open with a hammer handle every single time you want to cross breeze. The well has problems. The roof leaks in 3 places that I know about and probably one more that I haven't found yet. But it's mine. More importantly, it's a place where I can fix things. And for a man like me, that matters more than anything else in the world. Behind the house is my workshop, and that workshop is the only thing I've ever really been good at. I repair agricultural equipment for the farms scattered across this valley. Balers, combines, irrigation pumps, engine blocks. I can look at a broken machine and know exactly what went wrong. I can read a hydraulic diagram the way some people read the daily news. I can estimate a repair cost within 5%, and I have never once given a customer false hope about a timeline. That accuracy matters when you're living paycheck to paycheck. People trust it. They know that when James Hartwell tells you something, it's the truth. It might not be the truth you want to hear, but it's the truth. And in a world where most people are trying to sell you something, that kind of honesty is worth its weight in gold. I drive a 2009 pickup that burns a quart of oil every 300 miles. The radio only gets one station, a country station out of Carlisle that I barely tolerate but never change. I work 6 days a week and spend Sunday afternoons with my daughter. Her name is Sophie. She just turned 8 years old. If you ask the people in town what they knew about me, most would say I was quiet. A few would say I was strange, the kind of strange that comes from keeping to yourself too long. Carol Beeson, who works at the feed store, told someone twice that I gave her an uneasy feeling, though she couldn't say exactly why. There was just something about me that made her uncomfortable. Maybe it was the way I didn't try to be friendly. Maybe it was the way I seemed to be somewhere else even when I was standing right in front of you. Grant Mercer lent me a specialty drill bit 2 winters ago and never mentioned it again, because he felt something like pity and didn't know what to do with it. He saw something in me that reminded him of loss, and he didn't have the words for it. Nobody in Holt County knew that I used to be a structural engineer. Nobody knew that I spent 3 years on bridge rehabilitation contracts in Pittsburgh. Nobody knew that I had 2 patents registered in my name, or that I had stopped collecting royalties on them 7 years ago. Nobody knew why I left the city, because I had never told them. They didn't know about the phone call I received in a parking garage on a Tuesday afternoon. They didn't know about sitting in my truck for 2 hours unable to drive. They didn't know that my wife died when Sophie was 14 months old. That's the kind of thing that changes a man forever. It was a car accident on I-376, a wet night, a truck that crossed the median. I got the call at a project site and I sat there in my truck in the dark and couldn't move for 2 hours. I couldn't feel my hands. I couldn't feel my face. I could only feel the phone in my lap and the words the hospital administrator was saying. And those words didn't make sense. They were English words. I understood English, but they didn't make sense. After that, Pittsburgh didn't make sense as a place to exist anymore. I needed something simple. Work I could see the results of with my own hands. Land I could stand on, a quiet that wasn't emptiness but something closer to steadiness. I found all of that here on this road, on this property, in this workshop. The work barely paid the bills. The land asked nothing except attention. And Sophie had grown into a kid who believed with a kind of conviction that sometimes made my chest ache that her father was the most capable person in the world. That belief wasn't entirely wrong. I could fix nearly anything mechanical that came through my shop doors. But charm was what people understood, and I had never been comfortable being legible to strangers. Over 7 years, I had become invisible to most of Holt County. This worked for me most of the time. But October changed things. Sophie started second grade that fall, and the transition was harder than I expected. The other kids already had their groups. The best friendships were already formed. Sophie came home that first week with her dress on backwards because she had changed for PE, and nobody had told her it was inside out. Some kids had laughed. By the third week, she was asking if she could stay home from school. I didn't have an answer for that. I could fix a broken pump. I could rebuild an engine from its parts. I could not fix the way my daughter didn't quite fit into her own classroom. I could not fix the way the world treated children who didn't know the rules yet. So I did what I had always done. I listened. She told me about Maddie, who had a hamster with 3 legs, about the proper procedure for sharpening a pencil using the wall sharpener, about the classroom goldfish that had disappeared and nobody would explain where it had gone. I treated her observations as seriously as she meant them, which was to say as the most important things in the world. Because for her they were. That Thursday night was when the storm came. The forecast had called for rain, and rain arrived with a kind of commitment that weathermen politely describe as severe. By 9 o'clock in the evening, the power was out across 3 miles of the valley. I lit the hurricane lamps in the kitchen and the front room. I checked the circuit panel twice, even though I knew it wasn't an electrical problem. Then I settled at the kitchen table with the flashlight and the invoice I had been trying to reconcile for a week. A baler repair for the Tolan farm that had ballooned to twice the original estimate because the crankshaft had turned out to be cracked in a place nobody had seen. Sophie was asleep upstairs in her room. The rain hammered the roof in waves. At 10:47, the dog started barking. I didn't own a dog. The barking was coming from outside, from the direction of the road. There were no dogs in this part of the county that ran loose at night. Not since the Perkins family's shepherd had died the previous spring. I took the flashlight and went to the front porch. The rain was cold and diagonal, driven by a wind that came off the hills with a sound like paper tearing. I swept the flashlight beam across the gravel drive, past the fence post, toward the road. There was a figure standing at the edge of the drive, maybe 40 feet out, partially visible through the curtain of rain. It was a woman. She was standing completely still, facing the house, her arms at her sides. She wore what appeared to be a blazer, the kind that probably cost more than my truck, entirely unsuitable for this weather. Dark trousers. Her hair lay flat against her face and neck from the rain. She wasn't moving. She appeared to be looking at the light from my hurricane lamp. There was something in the way she stood that made me feel like I needed to move. So I did. I stepped off the porch into the rain and walked toward her. She didn't speak when I approached. Her eyes tracked me as I came closer, but her expression was difficult to read. Not frightened exactly, more like disoriented, like someone who had just woken up in a place they didn't recognize. Her lips were pressed together. Her hands, when I noticed them, were shaking. "Ma'am," I said, "are you all right?" She looked at me for a moment. Then she said very precisely, "I'm not entirely certain where I am." Her voice was steady, almost measured, the voice of someone trying to compensate for what was happening in the rest of her body. But there was something else in it too, a kind of authority. The voice of someone accustomed to making demands on reality and expecting the world to reorganize itself around her questions. "You're on Route 9, I said. "Outside Holt County, about 4 miles from town." I paused. "Are you hurt?" "I don't think so." She looked down at herself as if checking. "I may have walked some distance. I'm not certain how far." I looked past her toward the road. I could not see any vehicle in the darkness. "Come inside," I said. "You need to get warm." She hesitated for just a moment. It was the hesitation of someone accustomed to making decisions, even in her diminished state. Some part of her was still evaluating the situation, still running a calculation. Then the wind came again and she shivered once, hard, and that settled it. The lamplight inside the kitchen was amber and steady. I set out a kitchen chair and went for towels without explaining myself. There was nothing to explain. The woman was wet and cold, and the fastest way to address that was to act, not narrate. I brought 2 towels from the hall closet and a heavy flannel work shirt that was clean. I put a kettle on the propane burner and went upstairs to check on Sophie. She was still asleep, her stuffed rabbit tucked under one arm. I stood in her doorway for a moment, thinking about the child who believed I could fix anything, knowing that the one thing I couldn't fix was how the world treated her. Then I came back down. The woman had gotten out of her wet blazer, but was standing in the kitchen in her expensive blouse and dark trousers, still shivering. She looked smaller without the blazer, younger, more lost, more human. "Here," I said, handing her a towel and the flannel shirt. She took them like they might bite her. "I can pay you for the trouble," she said. "Not necessary." "Then how—" She stopped. "You expect gratitude." "I expect you to dry off and drink the tea I'm making." I turned away to find mugs. I heard her moving behind me, the sounds of wet fabric being peeled away. When I turned back with 2 mugs of chamomile, she was wearing my flannel shirt, which hung on her like a costume, swallowing her frame entirely. She looked at me across the kitchen table. "I can pay," she said again. Different now. Not a statement, a question. "For what?" "For the shirt, the towels, the tea, for whatever you're about to do for me." I sat down across from her. "I'm not doing this for you to pay for. I'm doing it because it's cold out there and you're wet. Money doesn't change that." She stared at me like I had spoken in a language she had studied once, but never actually heard spoken aloud. "People don't help without expecting something," she said finally. "Maybe not the people you know." She didn't respond to that. She drank the tea instead, holding the mug between both hands like it was something she might otherwise drop. Her hands still shook slightly, but the tremor was different now. Not from cold, from something else. From the experience of wanting something and not being able to have it. From the terrifying realization that her money couldn't buy her way out of this moment. "What's your name?" I asked. She hesitated. And in that hesitation, I understood that whatever she was about to tell me wouldn't be the truth. Or at least not the whole truth. "Victoria," she said. "I'm James." "Did you find me on your property, James?" "You were on the road. About 40 feet from the drive. And you brought me in." "Yes." "Why?" He thought about this for a long moment. "Because the storm was getting worse and you didn't have anywhere else to be." She looked away. At the window where rain streaked the dark glass. At her hands. At the mug like it was the most important thing she had ever seen. "I wrecked my car," she said quietly. "About 1.5 miles south. I don't remember driving off the road. I remember it was raining and I was on the phone and then the car was spinning and then..." She stopped. "Then I was walking." "Are you hurt?" "I don't think so. I've been checked for things before. I know what it feels like when something's broken." I didn't ask what that meant. I understood enough from the way she said it. "Do you have someone to call?" She laughed. It wasn't a happy sound at all. "Not anyone who can help in the next hour. Not anyone who..." She stopped again. "I don't want to call anyone tonight." I understood then that whatever had brought her to my porch went deeper than the rain. Deeper than an accident. There was something in the way she said that sentence that told me she was running from something. Or running towards something. And she wasn't ready to go back yet. "Okay," I said. "You can sleep upstairs. The guest room is clean. In the morning we'll figure out about the car." She looked at me like this was the strangest thing anyone had ever offered her. "Just like that?" "Just like that." The next morning she asked for espresso. "Don't have it," I said, opening the cabinet to show her what I did have. Regular coffee, tea, instant cocoa. She looked at my kitchen, at the propane stove, at the hand pump over the sink, at the way the light came through a window that was cracked on one side. "What do you have?" she said quietly. "Coffee, that's it." I watched something crack in her composure. Not anger. Something worse. The understanding that her preferences didn't matter here. That she had arrived in a world where money didn't translate. That she was powerless. She drank the coffee without complaint after that. But I saw her hands shake as she held the cup. Not from cold. From something else. From the experience of wanting something and not being able to have it. After breakfast, I said I was going to drive down to where she came off the road to see if we could find her car. Then we would figure out the next steps. She stood to come with me. "You should stay here," I said. "I should come with you. Your clothes are still wet and you need rest." She looked like she wanted to argue. Instead, she said, "There's a bag in the car. Important things. Documents." "I'll get it." I did. The car was crushed at a bad angle against a ditch. She was lucky to have walked away from it at all. I found her leather bag in the back seat. Expensive. Soaked. Her phone was at 2% battery. Her wallet contained a driver's license with a face that didn't look like the woman in my kitchen. On that driver's license, her name was Natalie Voss. The address was in Pittsburgh. And something about the way she was photographed, controlled and perfect and untouchable, made me understand that there were 2 very different versions of the person who had arrived on my porch. I didn't say anything about it. I just dried the phone and the documents as best I could and brought them back to the house. She was sitting on my porch when I came back, wearing her underclothes and my flannel shirt again because her other clothes were still drying by the propane stove. She looked like a castaway. Like someone who had left an entire world behind and was not sure if she had made the right choice. "Is it bad?" she asked. "It's pretty well destroyed, but that's what insurance is for. There are other things I need from it." I understood then that I wasn't asking the right questions. The things she was worried about losing weren't things you could claim on insurance. She asked if she could watch me work in the afternoon. I was fixing a pump for Martin Tolan, who owned one of the struggling farms in the valley. I said yes, and she came out to the workshop in my oversized shirt and bare feet because her shoes were still drying. She watched me from a stool while I worked, watched my hands move through the repair like they understood something my mind didn't have to consciously think through. Watched me read the broken parts like they were telling me a story about how they had failed. I felt her watching. And something about being seen like that after so many years of being invisible felt strange. Not bad, just different. After 20 minutes of silence, she said, "You studied engineering." I paused, didn't look up. "Why do you ask?" "Because I can see it, the way you look at this, the way you understand what the failure was before you even opened it. That's not a mechanic, that's someone who understands structure." I kept working, but I wasn't hiding anymore. She had already seen through me. "Pittsburgh," she continued. "Wasn't it?" "That's where you learned." "How do you know that?" "I looked it up last night." "Wi-Fi from the library." I searched for bridges in Pennsylvania with a specific design you mentioned when you were on the phone. I found 3 patents registered to your name. Daniel Marcus Hartwell. 2 of them worth significant money that you stopped collecting royalties on about 7 years ago. I set down my tools. "You what?" I was curious. About who keeps a structural engineer in a farm workshop? About who knows exactly how to fix a hydraulic system by feel? She paused. "Pittsburgh then, something happened there." "Why are you asking?" "Because someone doesn't leave that world and become invisible unless there's a reason. And when you look at your daughter, there's something about the way you look at her that makes me think the reason might have involved losing someone." I was quiet for a long time. Long enough that she knew she had crossed a line. Long enough that I decided what I was going to tell her. "My wife. Car accident when Sophie was not quite 2. I'm sorry. It was 7 years ago." "I'm still sorry." I picked my tools back up, and after a moment she asked, "Is that why you're kind?" "What?" "When you lose someone, does that make you kind to strangers, or were you already kind?" "I don't know. I don't think about it much." But I was thinking about it now. Thinking about the night I found her in the rain. Thinking about how I had walked toward her without deciding to. Thinking about how something in her disorientation had resonated with something in me about loss and not knowing where you were. She watched me work for another hour without speaking. By day 3, the power was back on in Holt County. The roads were passable. There was no good reason for her to stay. She told me this while we were having breakfast. Sophie was at school. I had a job to get to. "I need to figure out my situation," she said. "Get the insurance started on the car. Call my office." "Okay." I've been thinking about what I said. In the workshop. "I shouldn't have looked into your background. That was invasive. You wanted to know who you were dealing with." "Yes, that's fair." She put down her coffee. "My name isn't Victoria." "Not entirely. Victoria is my middle name. My real name is Natalie Voss." I waited. "I'm the CEO of a financial consulting firm in Pittsburgh. Or I was, until 3 months ago when I made some decisions about reporting methodology that made my board very unhappy. I've been operating under a certain amount of scrutiny since then. The accident was..." She stopped. I was distracted. I was on a conference call and I wasn't paying attention and I got distracted. "What were they calling about?" "Firing me." She said it very calmly, like she was reading a fact from a report. "Are they going to?" "Probably. Unless I can prove that my methodology was right and theirs was corrupt. And even if I can, it won't matter because I don't want to go back." I processed this. "So you wrecked your car and ended up on my porch because you don't want to go back to your job." That's reductive. But there was some part of me that wanted to disappear. And when the opportunity presented itself, you took it. Yes. I thought about this. About people who had so much they could afford to throw it away. About people who would look at my life and see it as throwing something away. But I also thought about her sitting on my porch in my flannel shirt, looking smaller and more lost than any person with $1 million in the bank should look. "You can stay a few more days," I said, "while you get things figured out." "Why would you do that?" "Because I think you need to. Because you feel sorry for me. Maybe some. But also because I think you're not ready to go back to that world yet. And rushing it won't help you figure out what you actually want." She was quiet for a long time. "My father died 6 months ago," she said finally. "He was 79. He had a stroke and they called me at a board meeting and I had to choose between going to the hospital or defending our quarterly projections in front of the SEC. She looked at me. I chose the projections. I got there in time, but he didn't wake up. He never woke up, and I realized that nobody, not my board, not my employees, not my colleagues, nobody was ever going to love me the way that man did. That unconditional. And I spent his last day choosing money over him, and now he's gone and I will never get that time back. I understood then that the wreck hadn't been an accident. Not exactly. Sophie's mother loved her like that, I said quietly. Would have moved mountains. And she's not here to do it. Is that what you're doing? Moving mountains for her? I'm trying. Some days I don't know if I'm doing it right. You are, I can see it. By day 4, she was in my house like she belonged there. She made breakfast while I worked. She sat at the kitchen table with Sophie in the evening and listened while my daughter explained the complicated social dynamics of 2nd grade. She didn't offer advice. She didn't try to fix anything. She just listened the way I did, taking every observation seriously, treating my daughter's concerns as the important things they were. Sophie started to relax around her. The tension in her small shoulders eased. She started to smile more. By the end of that 4th day, she called Natalie by her first name without being asked. She didn't call her mom, not yet. But the foundation was being laid for something. Something real. Something that would take time to build, but would be worth the wait. I found myself listening for her footsteps in the morning. Listening for her voice when she talked to Sophie about schoolwork. Listening for the way she pronounced certain words, the cadence of her speech. She had a voice that commanded attention, and yet she used it so gently now. She wasn't trying to convince anyone of anything. She was just present. Just being there. I realized that I was falling in love with her. It was terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. I hadn't allowed myself to feel this way about anyone since Margaret died. I had convinced myself that lightning doesn't strike twice, that loss was the price of love and it wasn't worth paying again. But here she was. A woman I had known for 4 days, a woman who had lied about her name, a woman who had more money than I would ever make in 10 lifetimes, and yet somehow she had become indispensable to me. But on day 4, something shifted. "I want to pay you," she said while we were doing dishes. "We've talked about this. You don't understand. I need to do something. I need to feel like I'm contributing. You don't owe me anything. That's not the point. The point is that I can't stay here for free. I can't be taken care of. I can't be—" She stopped. "Put down the dish. You can't be saved," I finished. "I don't want to be saved. I'm not trying to save you. I'm trying to help you figure out what you want. Those aren't the same thing. But there's a power imbalance. You're helping and You're rebuilding. That's not nothing." She looked at me, and I saw her wanting to argue, wanting to insist on a transactional framework because that was the only language she understood. Instead, she said, "I don't know how to not control situations." "Then this is good practice." Day 5, the insurance adjuster called. The car was fixable, barely. There would be a delay on the claim, but it was manageable. She asked if she could stay 1 more week. I said yes, but something had changed. She was no longer acting like she was temporarily stranded. She was acting like she was choosing to be here, and I was no longer acting like I was providing shelter. I was acting like I wanted her to stay. On the Saturday of her 2nd week, she came to the workshop while I was working on an invoice. "I've been thinking about the valley," she said. I looked up. "There are 3 farmers within 5 miles of your property that are operating at a significant loss. Not because the land is bad or the farmers aren't skilled, but because the equipment maintenance costs are unsustainable on current margins. I've been looking at the cooperative model and I think—" She stopped. She looked at me. "I'm not going to tell you what I think you should do, but I want to show you a financial model if you want to look at it." I studied her. "You're not doing this because you want to pay me back." "No. I'm doing this because I went back to Pittsburgh for 3 days and sat in 12 meetings and came home to a building with several elevators and thought about nothing for the entire trip except the repair shop on 11 acres in Holt County and the fact that the people around it are drowning slowly because nobody has looked at the structure." She paused. "I notice structures. It's what I do." "I know." I looked at the table. I thought about what it would mean. Not the money, which I didn't want, but the involvement, the complication. The way things changed when they became officially linked instead of quietly adjacent. I also thought about the people in town who looked at me with pity. About Sophie coming home from school with small defeats. About a valley that had been quietly failing for a decade. "Show me the model," I said. She opened her laptop. We talked for 3 hours. Sophie came in from outside and went out again and came in again and fell asleep on the couch at the far end of the room, and neither of us noticed the moment it happened. But by the time we finished, something had changed again. I wasn't helping her anymore. We were building something together. Natalie had to go back to Pittsburgh for the board vote on the projection models. "I'll be gone 4 days," she told me the morning she left. I nodded. Sophie asked 3 times if Victoria was coming back. I said I didn't know. But I knew. I was certain of it. I just didn't know if she would come back to me or if she would disappear back into that world forever. The house knew, the kitchen knew, the porch where we sat in the evenings knew. Everything in the place seemed to be waiting for her. She came back on day 5. I was in the yard when I saw her car come down the road. I didn't move. Just kept working on the pump like I hadn't seen her, like my heart hadn't just done something complicated in my chest. She got out slowly, like she wasn't sure about the decision to come back. She walked toward me. "It's done," she said. "The vote was postponed. The board is doing an independent audit. It's all going to work out the way I wanted it to. I won." I kept working. "Congratulations," I said, not looking at her. "Don't you want to know what happened?" "I think I can guess. You won your corporate fight and now you're back here because it's the right thing to do. Charity. Helping the people. Fixing the valley. Doing good." She was quiet. "Is that what you think this is?" I set down my tools and finally looked at her. "That you came back because you couldn't stay away. That winning doesn't matter anymore because the only thing you want is to be here. With me. And that terrifies you because you can't control it and you can't pay for it and you can't make it make sense in any framework you understand." She was shaking, not from cold. "You're right," she whispered. "You're right and I hate it. I've spent my entire life knowing what I wanted and how to get it. I've spent my entire life in control. And then I wrecked my car on a rainy night and ended up on a porch in the middle of nowhere and met someone who doesn't need anything from me. And suddenly nothing I know how to do matters." I didn't let her finish. I walked toward her and I held her while she cried. The kind of crying that someone does when they have been holding it together for decades and suddenly they are tired. The kind of crying that doesn't have an end point. Just a place where you finally stop running from it. I'm not keeping you warm, I said after a long time speaking into her hair. You're choosing to sit where the warmth is. She pulled back and looked at me. When you choose to fall down on purpose, she said, it means something different. It does. I don't know how to choose this. Yes, you do. You already did. You came back. Over the following months, what came together was not a charity. It was not a donation. It was something far more important than either of those things. It was a cooperative. 7 farms in the valley and my repair shop forming an equipment sharing and maintenance trust with a structured contribution model that Natalie's financial people helped build but did not control. The capital to start it came from a source that was laundered neatly through a regional agricultural development fund that nobody in Holt County would ever trace back to a woman who had once sat on a camp cot in a storage room and slept for 9 hours straight without dreaming, without fear, for the first time in her adult life. I fixed things. I had always fixed things. What changed was scale, the capacity to do it for more people, more consistently, at a cost that didn't require anyone to go without. The machinery of the cooperative meant that if a farmer couldn't afford to fix their equipment one month, they could pay the next month. It meant that shared resources meant individual farmers didn't have to buy expensive equipment, they would only use a few days a year. The Toland farm, which had been running at a loss for years, stayed solvent through a difficult spring when the rains didn't come and the yields were low. The insurance helped, but the insurance would have run out. With the cooperative, there was always someone to help, always a way forward. The valley that had been quietly failing for a decade stabilized, and most of the people in it had only a partial sense of why. They knew the coup existed, they knew it was helping. They didn't know that it existed because a woman in a blazer had gotten lost in the rain and ended up in my kitchen. Grant Mercer started being friendly in a way he clearly thought was new, but had just been waiting to emerge. He greeted me at the hardware store instead of nodding from a distance. He asked about Sophie. He even asked about Victoria, though he was careful to say her name like it was a question. Dale Winship never apologized. I didn't expect him to. Some people are too fixed in their patterns to change. But I noticed he started being a bit less cruel to other people. He didn't become kind, but he became less actively unkind. It was something. Natalie came back to Holt County 7 times before winter was over. She did not come back to check on the investment. She came back because the porch in the evenings had a quiet she had not found anywhere else in her adult life. She came back because Sophie always had an update about the 3-legged hamster and the missing goldfish and the complicated social dynamics of 2nd grade. She came back because I made coffee the way she now thought of as the right way to make it. No particular recipe, just the right amount of attention. She told me in March that she had started sleeping better. I said that was good. She looked at me across the kitchen table. You're not going to ask me why? Number. Why not? Because I think I already know, and I think you know that I know. She was quiet for a moment. You're a difficult person to do something kind for, she said. I've been told that. I'm not complaining. She turned her mug in her hands. I'm actually not complaining at all. Outside, Sophie was in the field. She was running in the way children run when there's no destination. Arms out, mouth open, going fast towards something invisible. The valley was wide and pale and the hills were still winter brown. But at the edges of the field, there was the first thin green coming up. The particular green that arrived in Holt County in early March. The green that meant the worst of it was behind you. The green that promised that life would return to this place. That growth would happen again. I watched my daughter run. I watched Natalie watch my daughter run. I saw the peace on her face. The kind of peace that comes from finally being where you're supposed to be. I thought about the night she had appeared in the kitchen doorway in her striped pajamas and looked at the stranger at the table and said with perfect confidence, "She can sleep in the house." I thought about the fact that I had not known in that moment what the next 5 months would bring. I had only known that there was a woman in the rain and that she needed warmth, and that the rest of it would work out to whatever it was going to be. It had worked out to this. The cooperative, the valley's slow recovery, the 7 farms that were still there, the man at the hardware store who nodded at me now, the road that was still gravel but no longer felt like a terminus. And this, a woman at my kitchen table turning her mug in her hands, not complaining, not yearning for something else, not calculating her next move, just present, just here, just choosing to stay. Then came the day that changed everything again. It was a Saturday morning in June. I was in the workshop when I heard the first car. Not a farm truck, not a beat-up sedan from town, a Mercedes. I looked up from the engine block I was working on and saw it come down the road. Then another one, a Lamborghini, then a Tesla, then a BMW 7 Series, then something that looked like a Rolls-Royce. They came in a slow procession down that gravel road, each one more out of place than the last. The dust kicked up by each successive car had a kind of majesty to it. It was surreal, like watching a convoy from another world invade our quiet valley. Sophie ran in, her eyes wide with excitement and confusion. Dad, look! I walked out of the workshop and just stood there. There were luxury cars lined up on my property, more than I could count, pulled out of nowhere, arriving like some kind of invasion from a world I had successfully avoided for 7 years. It was like watching a magazine come to life. I understood what was happening, or I thought I did. Natalie had changed her mind. She was going back. She was showing me what I was losing. She was demonstrating the gulf between her world and mine. But then Natalie came out of the house. She wasn't alone. She had Sophie's hand. She had that calm expression on her face that meant she had decided something and was going to follow through. A man in a three-piece suit stepped out of the Mercedes, then another man, then a woman in expensive heels that sank into my gravel like she was walking on sand. They looked around like they had arrived on a different planet, like they couldn't quite believe this place existed. Natalie walked down the steps with Sophie holding her hand. "I appreciate you coming," Natalie said to the people stepping out of the cars. Her voice was calm and clear. There was authority in it, but not the kind that came from money or power. The kind that came from knowing what you wanted and meaning it. "But this is my home now. This is my life. And if you need me professionally, you know how to reach me. But socially, I'm done. I'm choosing this. I'm choosing him. I'm choosing her." She pointed to me and Sophie. One of the men, probably someone important from the board, looked confused. He couldn't understand why anyone would choose a gravel road and a broken farmhouse over everything they had left behind in Pittsburgh. He couldn't understand how someone could willingly give up power and money and status for this. But I understood. I understood because I had made the same choice 7 years ago, just in the opposite direction. They left an hour later, driving back the way they came, their cars kicking up dust on a road that had never seen anything like them before. The gravel that we had driven on for so long, the road that had defined our isolation, became a testament to a new kind of living. That night, Holt County was alive with questions. Who was that woman? Where did those cars come from? Why would someone with a fleet of luxury vehicles stay on a poor single dad's broken farm? But I didn't answer any questions. I just sat on my porch with Natalie and Sophie, drinking coffee and watching the valley turn gold in the setting sun. The three of us sat together in silence, not needing words, needing only presence, needing only each other. The falling metaphor, which I had never fully understood until that moment, suddenly made perfect sense. Sophie was in the field again the next morning, running and falling on purpose. She got up and did it again, and again, each time with more confidence, each time with more joy. Natalie watched her from the porch. "She does that every morning," I said. "I know, I think I understand it now." "What does it mean?" "It means that when you choose to fall, it's not the same as being knocked over. When you decide it's going to happen, you get to control how you land. You get to stand back up. You get to try again." She looked at me. "That's what I did. I chose to fall. I chose to come here. I chose to let myself matter less to people and more to you." I reached over and took her hand. "That's what all of us did," I said. Sophie fell again in the field, and this time she laughed. A real laugh. Not the careful, measured laugh of a child learning to navigate social dynamics, but the full, unself-conscious laugh of a kid who was finally safe. A kid who was finally exactly where she was supposed to be. A kid who knew she was loved not because she fit into the world or because she had earned it somehow, but because someone had chosen to stand with her anyway. Because people who loved her had decided that her happiness mattered more than anything else in the world. And I finally understood what my father never got to understand, what I had never understood until this moment, that sometimes the greatest things we build are not made of steel and concrete. They are not structures that will outlast our names on any record. They are not the patents and the bridges and the achievements that we think matter so much when we're young and hungry and trying to prove something to the world. Sometimes the greatest things we build are the moments where we choose love over everything else, where we stand still long enough to let someone know they matter, where we say, "It's cold out here, come inside, the rest can wait." Where we open our doors not because we expect anything in return, but because it's the right thing to do, because we see someone suffering and we choose not to turn away. That's what I had done for a woman in the rain. That's what she had done for me in return. And that was the only foundation that ever really lasted. Not money, not achievement, not the esteem of people we didn't care about. Just love, just presence, just the choice to show up and be there and let someone matter to you. That's everything that matters. That's the foundation that will outlast us all. The years that followed were quiet. Not the empty kind of quiet I had known for 7 years before she arrived, but the kind of quiet that comes from being understood, from having someone who sees you completely and chooses to stay anyway. Sophie thrived. The dress-on backwards girl became the girl with the bright smile. She made friends. She stopped asking to stay home from school. Instead, she came home excited about what she had learned and who she had played with at recess. By the second grade, she wasn't the girl sitting alone at lunch anymore. She was the girl who organized games at recess. She was the girl who stood up for other kids who didn't quite fit in. She had learned from watching Natalie and me that being different wasn't something to hide. It was something to own. It was something to celebrate. Natalie moved into the house that spring. Not because I asked her to, but because one day she just started bringing more things, and then one day she didn't go back to Pittsburgh at all. She kept the consulting job, but it was just phone calls now. Just advice. She had learned that presence mattered more than achievement. She had learned that sitting on a porch that sagged on the West End, watching the sun set over a valley while drinking coffee the right way, was worth more than all the board meetings in the world combined. We didn't get married. We didn't feel like we needed to. We had something better than a piece of paper. We had a choice. Every single day we both chose to stay. We both chose to show up. We both chose to build something that mattered. And I think that's more honest than any vow could ever be. Vows are promises made when you think you know what the future holds. But our choice was made every single day, renewed each morning when we woke up and decided to be present for each other. The valley kept recovering. More farms joined the cooperative. The Tolan farm expanded to twice its original size. Grant Mercer retired and recommended his son take over the hardware store, and the son was kinder than the father had ever been. He actually smiled at people. He remembered their names. He asked about their families. The whole dynamic of the town changed because people saw that kindness was possible, that it was worth it, that being good to each other actually mattered. Dale Winship moved away that next fall. I never did find out why he had been so angry, and eventually I stopped caring. Some people carry their burdens so heavily that they can't help but drop them on other people. I understood that now. I understood that his anger said nothing about me and everything about him. That realization freed me from needing to convince him of my worth. Sophie grew up fast. By the time she was 16, she was helping in the repair shop every Saturday morning, learning the trade from me the way her mother would have wanted. She understood that fixing things with your hands was just as valuable as fixing them with your mind. She could read a hydraulic diagram before she could read Shakespeare. She understood the logic of machines in a way that most adults never do. She was the kind of teenager that other parents pointed to as an example. Not perfect, not without her struggles, but grounded, real, capable of complex thought and honest emotion. She could talk about machinery and social dynamics in the same conversation. She could explain to a farmer why his equipment was failing and also explain to a lonely kid why fitting in mattered less than being true to yourself. But she was also learning from Natalie about the broader world. Natalie taught her about economics and ethics, about how systems could be designed to help people or hurt them, about how power could be used to build or destroy. Sophie became someone who understood both worlds, someone who could fix an engine and also understand the financial model that determined whether a farm would survive. Someone who understood that technical knowledge and human knowledge had to work together to solve real problems. One day, when she was 17, she came to me and said she wanted to study engineering in college, but not the kind I had studied. She had watched me spend 3 years building bridges in Pittsburgh that other people would benefit from, but that didn't feed my soul. She had watched me find peace in fixing individual machines for individual farmers. And she had watched Natalie use her financial knowledge to help an entire valley. She wanted to study agricultural engineering. She wanted to figure out ways to help farmers be more efficient without destroying the land. She wanted to build a career around the things she saw me do every day. Fix things, make things work better. Create systems that help more people than they hurt. I told her I was proud of her. Natalie told her the same thing. We both meant it more than any words could express. We were seeing the fruit of our choices reflected in our daughter. This child who had once believed her father could fix anything was becoming someone who understood that the greatest fixes required more than just technical knowledge. They required compassion. They required understanding. They required belief that things could be better. And late at night, when the house was quiet and the valley was sleeping, I would sometimes sit on that porch that still sagged on the west end and think about a night when the rain came down so hard that everything seemed like it might wash away. I thought about a woman in a blazer standing in the darkness. I thought about a choice I made to walk toward her instead of turning away. I would think about how she had knocked on my door while I was thinking about my own loss. How I had found in her something I didn't know I was looking for. How she had found in me something she had lost years ago. A kind of unconditional acceptance. A kind of love that didn't keep score. A kind of family that was built not on blood but on choice. That simple choice had changed everything. Not just for me, for her, for Sophie, for the entire valley that depended on the cooperative that existed because she had seen a problem and decided to help solve it. It had filled my house with laughter. It had given my daughter a mother. It had given me back my faith in people. It had shown me that sometimes the greatest things in life come not from achievement or success, but from standing still long enough to let someone know they matter. From saying, "It's cold out here, come inside, the rest can wait." I think about how that moment, that single moment when I chose to walk out into the rain instead of staying inside, had rippled out in ways I could never have predicted. How it had saved not just her, but an entire valley. How it had given my daughter a fuller life than she could have had if she'd only had me. How it had allowed me to become the person I was meant to be rather than the ghost I had been becoming. Some people might say I saved Natalie Voss, the billionaire who lost everything and found herself. But the truth is more complicated than that. She didn't need saving. She needed to be seen. She needed to understand that there were people in the world who would help her without expecting anything in return. She needed to learn that not everyone was trying to use her. That some people just cared because caring was the right thing to do. And maybe in a way, she did save me. She saved me from a life of quiet invisibility. She reminded me that being lonely was a choice, that I didn't have to stay isolated forever, that there was another way to live, a way that included risk, a way that included opening your heart even though you knew it could be broken. That's what I would tell people, if they ever asked. That's the story I would tell them. That's the story of how a poor single dad's life changed forever the night he sheltered a lost billionaire woman in the rain. And how in opening his door to her, he opened his heart to the possibility of change. It's a story about choices, small ones, quiet ones, the kind that don't feel like they matter in the moment but that reshape everything that comes after. And how sometimes, when you make that choice, Everything changes, not all at once, not dramatically, but slowly, quietly, the way the sun rises over the hills in early spring. The way green comes back after winter. The way a broken valley can heal when enough people decide to stop letting it fail. That's the story of James Hartwell and Natalie Voss. A poor single dad and a lost billionaire woman. A man who had learned to fix things, and a woman who needed to learn the same. A father who loved his daughter and a woman who learned to love. And how they built a life together that was richer and fuller and more meaningful than either of them could have imagined on the night she stood in the rain and asked where she was. It's a story about the power of choice, about how the smallest decision to be kind to a stranger can reshape not just 2 lives, but an entire community. It's a story about understanding that sometimes the greatest achievements are the quiet ones. Not the bridges built in Pittsburgh that will stand for 100 years, but the bridges built between 2 broken people who had both given up on love. It's a story that says, if you listen carefully, that maybe you don't have to wait for lightning to strike twice. Maybe you can build something real and lasting and worth having with someone you meet on a rainy night. Maybe home isn't a place at all. Maybe it's a person. Maybe it's the choice to stay when leaving would be easier. Maybe it's choosing love when fear tells you to run. It's about understanding that life doesn't owe us second chances. That loss is real and permanent and will always be a part of us. But that doesn't mean we can't build something new, something different, something beautiful on top of the ruins of what was. It's about believing that broken things can be fixed, that broken people can be healed, not by erasing what happened before, but by choosing to move forward anyway, by choosing to open the door, by choosing to say yes when your first instinct is to say no, by choosing to love when loving seems impossible. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's everything. Maybe that's the truest thing I've ever known. That a poor single dad can shelter a lost billionaire woman, and in doing so, save not just her, but himself. That a gravel road can become a pathway to home. That a broken valley can heal. That a man who thought he was done living can find that he was just beginning. That sometimes all it takes is one person walking out into the rain. One simple choice to offer warmth. One moment of human connection to change everything. That's the story I would tell you. That's the story that changed my entire life completely forever. And I hope that somewhere, someone who needs to hear it is listening right now in this very moment.